Bezras Hashem, today's Amud in Maseches Berachos is Nun Amud Aleph, 50a. We're going to start at the Mishnah on Mem Tesimud Beis, Ketzad Mizamnin, about 10-12 lines from the bottom of the page. We're going to have two sections in today's learning. First section we'll deal with is the appropriate lashon, the appropriate language in zimun. And we'll see actually there's a debate as the numbers increase, perhaps the nusach of the zimun should also increase. We'll see, that's going to be a machlokes. As well as we'll see in this section, we'll deal with the implications of one's language of zimun. Could show he's a Talmid Chacham, or could show that he is a bore, an empty person. Second section we'll deal with is that machlokes, actually Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yosi will explain the backstory. If the numbers increase, does the lashon also increase or not? So as Hashem, let's get started at the Mishnah. Now, really, we've touched on two of these, which is when you have 3 people, there's a specific lashon, versus when you have 10 people. We know that already. When you have 10, you invoke the name of Hashem. 3, you don't, but you still have a zimun. Here we're going to see perhaps there's an even more increase as we go up in number, at least according to one Tana in our Mishnah. So the Mishnah starts off towards the bottom of Tesimud Beis, Ketzad Mizamnin. How do we make a zimun? What is the lashon? What is the nusach of a zimun that we say when joining our brachas together, Birkas Hamazon? So the Mishnah says as follows: Bishleisha oimer mevorach. When there's 3 people, so you say mevorach, which means if there's 2 others plus the mizamin, the one who's leading, so you say mevorach. Now mevorach is a lashon which we've already emphasized. It's where we group together. We will bless Hashem. It's a group lashon. We gather together our bracha. Bishloisha vehu. Now, if there's 3 plus him, means there's really 4 people. So then, oimer barachu. Now, barachu means he says to the 3 people who are there, "You are enough to bless." Meaning it's a pluralistic language of bless. You bless Hashem because you're enough people to bless Hashem independently, and therefore barachu. We'll see in the Gemara. Actually, this is not the ideal language. The ideal language is nevarich, but the Mishnah means to say you could say barachu. That's the point. We'll see in the Gemara. Ba'asara oimer, when there's 10 people, so the leader says, Nevarich Elokeinu, you invoke the name of Hashem, as we mentioned before. Ba'asara v'hu, now if there's 10 plus him, which means there's really 11 people, oimer barachu. So again, then you could say, Barachu Elokeinu, means because really you're referring to the other 10. The 10 people who are here could bless Hashem, means you're leading them, but you don't have to group yourself together. Now again, we're going to see in the Gemara, it's not necessarily ideal, but it's saying you could say Barachu. Now this clause that I'm about to read seems to contradict the following clause, but we'll read it, and we'll see ultimately in the Gemara, this is a point of machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yosi. Because the Mishnah now says, Echad asara ve'echad asara ribo. Whether there's 10 people, or there's 10 times 10,000 people, which is 100,000 people, regardless, that's where you stop. It means, Nevarech Elokeinu, or Baruch Elokeinu, Baruch Hu Elokeinu. That's it. That's the end. Now we're going to see that actually reflects the position of Rabbi Akiva, which we'll see in the Seifa of the Mishnah, because clearly it contradicts the next statement of the Mishnah, which is, as we'll continue, B'meyahu Aimer, if there's 100 people, so the leader says, Nevarech Hashem Elokeinu. So you add in a word now, Nevarech Hashem Elokeinu. We will bless Hashem our God. B'meyahu, if there's 100 plus him, 101, Aimer Baruch Hu. So Baruch Hu Hashem Elokeinu, the same idea. If there's 1,000 people, so the leader says, Nevarich Hashem Elokeinu Elokei Yisrael. Right? You add in another language, which is, we will bless Hashem our God, the God of Israel. If there's 1,000 people plus him, Oimer Baruch Hu. Okay, the same language as Baruch Hu instead of Nevarich. Beriboy Oimer, if there's 10,000 people, he says, and if there's 10,000 people doing Birkas Hamazon together, it's pretty chashuv. Nevarich Hashem Elokeinu Elokei Yisrael. We will bless Hashem our God, the God of Israel. Elokei Tzvakos, the God of hosts. Yoshef HaKruvim, the one who dwells on the Kruvim. Ala Mazon She'achalnu, based on the food that we have eaten. Beriboy V'hu Oimer. Now, if there's 10,000 plus him, so then he says Baruch Hu, not Nevarich, but Baruch Hu. Now, all of these clearly imply, as you go up beyond 10, you do add another lashon. So the Gemara is going to say there's an inherent contradiction in the Mishnah, and we'll clarify it's a machlokes. The Mishnah continues, just as the leader says, kach einim acharav. So too the responders respond in the same language, which is in this case of 10,000, they'll respond, Baruch Hashem Elokeinu Elokei Yisrael Elokei Tzavakos Yeshiv Hakruvim Ala Mazon She'achalnu. Means the response, like we say Baruch She'achalnu Mishalai when there's 3, so the response is also related to that. We'll also respond with 10,000, for example, which is actually the position, as we'll see, Rabbi Yitzchak Glili in the same language. Now, this is really the machlokes that I was just referencing. The end of the Mishnah says, Rabbi Yitzchak Glili says, which seems to support this position of increasing the language as the number of people increases. Lefi RYhG he mevorachim. Based on the number of people, the language of the bracha, of the zimun bracha, would change. Shene'emar, the pasuk in Tehillim tells us, B'makelos baruch hu Elokim Hashem. Now, literally it means, in the congregations, plural, they blessed Elokim Hashem imikor Yisrael, from inside of Israel. So the way the Mefarshim speak out what the drasha is, b'makelos means different kehilos. It's a pluralistic language. We'll bless Hashem differently. What do you mean to bless Hashem differently? It means if you have 10 people, you say one sort of a bracha. If you have 100 and 1,000 and 10,000, it will change based on the number of people. Rabbi Akiva, but Rabbi Akiva argues, Rabbi Yitzchak Glili says, no, ma'amatzina bebeis hakneses, just as we find in the beis hakneses when it comes to krias Hatorah, echad merubim ve'echad muatim, whether there's a lot of people or few people, it's 10 or 10,000, Omer Baruch Hu es Hashem. You always say Baruch Hu es Hashem by krias Hatorah. So therefore, so too in Berachos Hamazon, in the zimun, if there's 10 or 10,000, you always will say the same nusach. Now, the Rabbi Yishmael just argues on what Rabbi Akiva said in that point. He says, Rabbi Akiva seems to say that the appropriate way to bless the Torah is Baruch Hu es Hashem. He doesn't say mevorach. So Rabbi Yishmael Omer, Baruch Hu es Hashem mevorach. Actually, you're supposed to add in the word mevorach, and we'll touch on this in a moment in the end of the Gemara. So now the Gemara starts us off and tells us like this. Our Mishnah had told us if you have 3, so you say mevorach. If you have 3 plus him, then you say Baruch Hu. So Shmuel disagrees. Seemingly. Amar Shmuel, la'olam al yotzi adam esatzma min haklal. You shouldn't exclude yourself from the group. So the way Rashi explains it means, even if it's 3 plus 1, it's 3 plus you should still say mevorach. Don't say Baruch Hu, because Baruch Hu is you should bless. You're saying to the other 3 individuals. No, mevorach means we will bless together. Says the Gemara, but Tanan b'shloisha v'hu aymer Baruch Hu. But our Mishnah seems to contradict that, because our Mishnah said when there's 3 plus him, you say Baruch Hu. So the Gemara says, Ema, turn to Nonamud Aleph, Af Baruch Hu. Like I explained the Mishnah. What the Mishnah means to say, this is how Rashi learns. Taisus maybe learns a little bit differently, but the way Rashi learns is, ideally, like Shmuel says, mevorach is the best thing to do because it includes yourself with the other people who are there. What the Mishnah means to say is you could also say Baruch Hu and it's also Yaitse. But actually, it's more ideal to say mevorach because you group yourself together. Taisvus learns it's lav dafka better, but what it really means is they're equal. It means they're on equal standing. But Rashi, if you take a look at Rashi, Af Baruch Hu, Shapir Dami Umiu Toiv Loi Lios Bechlala Mevorchim. So Rashi seems to learn Mevorach is more ideal. Baruch Hu is acceptable, that's what the Mishnah is saying, but Mevorach is more ideal. The Amar Rav Barahava, and the Gemara brings a riot because Rav Barahava said, Amri Bei Rav, that it was said in the base medrash of Rav Tanina that we taught, we're going to teach in the next Mishnah, Vav Nechlakim Ad Yud. The halacha is if 6 people eat together until 10, not including 10, means if 6 people till 9 people eat anything in that range, 6, 7, 8, 9, the halacha is that Nechlakim, they're allowed to split into different groups. So the Gemara says, but wait a second. If 4 people have a koyach over 3, that you could say Baruch Hu, and Baruch Hu is superior, how are you allowed to split that up? You're no longer going to have 4, now you're only going to have 3. If you say Nevarich Adif, Nevarich is better, or what the Tosfos learns is, it's at least equal. So I understand why they could split up and do 2 separate zimunim. Baruch Hu Adif. But if you learn Baruch Hu is actually superior, and you could only say Baruch Hu if you have 4, Samai nechlakin. Why would they be allowed to split up? Elalav, it must be Shmamina Nevarich Adif. It must be that Nevarich is actually superior. Shmamina, and that's an acceptable proof. Meaning to say, Nevarich is superior, Baruch Hu is an option, the way Rashi learns, but it's better to include yourself with using the language of Nevarich. Tani nami hachi, a brisa supports this. Bein she'amar barachu, bein she'amar mevorach. Whether the leader says where it's 3 plus 1 means it's 3 people, really 4 people. Whether they said mevorach or they said barachu, ain't taif. We don't grab him. Means we're not makbid on such a guy. That's fine. You could say either way, says the brisa. Ain't taif al kach. We don't grab him about this thing. We don't hold him. We don't say you're doing the wrong thing. Vahanakdanin, but the perfectionist, the exacting type people, they would hold him accountable. Means they would say, no, include yourself like Shmuel said, and you should really say nevarech and not say barachu. And the Gemara continues on a note here, which is a fascinating thing. You can tell if somebody's a Talmid Chacham or a bor based on how they conduct themselves in the language of zimun. Means if somebody uses the accurate lashon in zimun, more appropriate lashon in zimun, you can tell he's a Talmid Chacham. If not, you tell he's a bor, he's an empty person. So the Gemara says, how do we know? Let's see. We go through a series of examples. You could tell from the brachos of a person, specifically we're focusing on zimun, if he's a Talmid Chacham, or if not, if he's considered empty person. Okay, so let's go through the proofs. The first one is like this, the examples. Rabbi explained like this: Uvetuvoi harei Talmid Chacham. If he says Uvetuvoi, right? He says, with your goodness, Hashem, Chayinu, we live. With your goodness means your goodness supports us. Your goodness takes care of us. Harei Talmid Chacham. That's considered a Talmid Chacham. He's thanking Hashem that all of Hashem's goodness, everything he receives from Hashem is goodness, and he's thanking Hashem for that. That's a Talmid Chacham. But if he says umituvai, which means from your goodness, Hashem, which minimizes, it's a diminishment of the goodness Hashem gives you, harei zebor, that's considered a foolish person. It's minimizing, not all of the goodness, but it's some of mim. Mim is miktsas, it's some of it. So some of your goodness, that minimizes the greatness of Hashem. So Amarle Abai le Rav Dimi, Abai says to Rav Dimi, we know a pasuk that implies mituvai, a similar lashon, because Vaksiv, the pasuk in Shmuel tells us, David HaMelech says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Umi berchascha yevorach beis avdecha la'olam. He asks Hashem, from your blessings, beis avdecha should be blessed forever. Umi berchascha, from your blessings. L'chayre, how can you say that's a negativity, that it's minimizing Hashem's greatness, if l'chayre David HaMelech said that to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So the answer is b'she'ela shani. No. When you're asking Hashem for something, so it would be haughty, it would be too much to say, give me all the goods. You say to yourself, from your goodness, give me something good. But not in a more, but when you're thanking Hashem in Berachos Hamazon and the zimun, there it's appropriate to say, bituvai. Says the Gemara, b'she'ela nami, but in regards to she'ela also we find you're supposed to go all out, not just say mituvai. Because Haksiv, the pasuk says in Tehillim, David HaMelech himself, harchev picha va'amaleyu. What does HaKadosh Baruch Hu say? Open your mouth and ask. What does it mean? He says, open your mouth and ask for everything. Don't ask for some of my goodness. HaKadosh Baruch Hu instructs man, ask for everything good. So clearly even in she'ela you're allowed to ask. Even in she'ela, you're allowed to ask in terms of everything, for everything. So the Gemara answers that's different. Really, in regards to she'ela, it's not appropriate to ask for everything, and the appropriate lashon would be, like we said, umi berchasecha. Hahu, but that pasuk archepicha v'amaleyu, we say in Psukei Zimra on Shabbos actually. Hahu b'divrei Torah ksiv. Regards to divrei Torah, you want to ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for goodness, for success. There you ask for the epitome of success, the greatest successes. Other material successes, there you ask in a more humble way, mi berchasecha. But in regards to what we're saying, thanking Hashem, you thank Him all out, not umituvai. It's rather uftuvai chayinu.
That's what the dentists put on their things.
What do they put?
This pasuk.
I hear. Good. Open mouth and you'll fill it. Exactly. Tanya continues the Gemara. Now we're going to go through another example that shows the difference between Talmid Chacham and Bor. If somebody says B'tuvai chayinu, with your goodness chayinu, you support us, you give us life. Chayinu, we have life. Harei ze Talmid Chacham. That's a Talmid Chacham. And again, Rashi explains here because chayinu includes yourself with the kahal, which we've already learned is the appropriate thing to do. But if he says B'tuvai chayim, right, with your goodness chayim, you give life in general, harei ze bor, that's considered an empty person. Rashi explains again because the idea is you're excluding yourself. You're excluding yourself from the people, and that's considered a negative thing, like Shmuel told us before. Now, nahar baloi masni ibcha. Nahar baloi taught the opposite. He says you're actually supposed to say chayim because it means you're giving chayim to the world. You're saying, Hashem, you give chayim, you give to the entire world, not limiting it to your group. But the halacha doesn't follow him. Rather, you say chayinu and not chayim, like we said before. Let's go to the third example now. Amar B'Yechanan, mevorach she'achalnu mishaloi, harei talmid chacham. If somebody says, we will bless she'achalnu mishaloi, to the one whom we ate from, which is to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So harei talmid chacham. There you clearly imply that you're blessing Hashem. You're thanking Hashem after your meal. So that's a talmid chacham. But if you say, limi she'achalnu mishaloi, to the one whom we ate from, which Rashi explains could imply other people, referring maybe to the host, the balabas. Harei zebor, that's an empty person. Amalei Rav Acha B'Rei Rav Ravashi. Rav Acha B'Rei said to Ravashi, V'ha Amrinan, but in Haggadah Shel Pesach, part of the liturgy, part of what we say is Lemisha Asala Avosenu. It's Lefikach Anachnu. Over there it says Lemisha Asala Avosenu Velanu, to the one whom did for our forefathers and us, as Kol Anisim Elu, all of these wonderful miracles. So L'chayr, you see, we use the word Lemi, and that's not considered a negative thing. So Amar Lei, Sir Rashi said back, no, there's a distinction. Hasa Muchacha Milsa. Over there, the matter is clear. Man Ovid Nisi, who's the one who did the miracles? Kudshabrichu Hashem. So therefore, in that context, you're not thanking anyone but Hashem. It's very clear. But here, by Birkas Hamazon, Adarabba, you just ate at someone's house, and it could imply, if you say Lemi, that you're thanking the Balabas. You know, the Gemara in Saita, if I remember correctly, says that Avram Avinu, his great thing is that after people would eat in his house, they would want to thank him, and he would say, "Don't thank me, thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu." Train us to do Birkas Hamazon, recognize Hashem, etc. That's the natural reaction. So therefore, if you say Lemi, it could have an alternative implication. So don't say Lemi. Let's continue. Fourth example. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Baruch she'achalnu mishaloi. If somebody says, blessed is Hashem, or some gears to change it to nevarach, but the focus is she'achalnu mishaloi, that we ate from him. So harei talmid chacham, that's a talmid chacham. But if he says ala mazon she'achalnu, if he says, I thank Hashem ala mazon she'achalnu, for the food that we ate, harei zebor, that's an empty person. And the reason is because it sounds like perhaps you're blessing the food and not Hashem. It's like Rabbi Freeman was mentioning yesterday, when we're doing Kiddush Levana, we're not blessing the moon. It's important to know, we're not davening to the moon. So the point is, ala mazon she'achalnu, we're not blessing the food. If you say ala mazon, it sounds like maybe we're blessing the food. Harei zebor. Amar Rafuna Breder of Yeshua, Le'amar Nela Begimel. This is only an issue if you say ala mazayin, if there's only three people, Delek Hashem Shamayim, because you don't invoke the name of Hashem in the zimun when you have three. Avol ba'asara de'ik Hashem Shamayim. But if there's 10 people where you do naturally invoke the name of Hashem in the lashon, Muchecha Milsa, so it becomes clear that you're davening to Hashem, you're blessing Hashem, and therefore it wouldn't be an issue necessarily. Kid, it's not like the Mishnah is going to tell us. The Mishnah told us before, Ke'inyan shehu mevorach, just as the leader says, Kach einen acharav, the responders say in the zimun as well, which is Baruch Hashem Elokei Yisrael Elokei Atzvakos. This was 10,000. But the point is that in such a scenario where you invoke the name of Hashem, to say ala mazon doesn't have any other implication. Any of these scenarios that it might mean the balabas or it might mean the food, it doesn't make a difference because you naturally invoke the name of Hashem, and therefore that wouldn't be a problem. Okay, now moving on to the second section. We're going to discuss now this machlokes Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yitzchak. Right? We said the machlokes in the Mishnah, do you increase the language of zimun as the numbers increase beyond 10? Rabbi Yitzchak said we do, Rabbi Akiva said we don't. But before we get there, the Gemara shows that in the Mishnah itself there seems to be a contradiction. Because first the Mishnah said, whether there's 10 or 100,000, 10 times 10,000, you always say, and that's it. So Hagufa Kasha, the Gemara says there's an inherent contradiction here. First the Mishnah says, whether there's 10 or 10,000, it stays the same. So we see it's the same. There's no increase in language. But then the Mishnah continues to say that there's a difference if it's 100, 1,000, 10,000. So clearly the language does increase as the numbers increase. So Rav Yosef Leikash, Rav Yosef, not a problem. Ha Rabbi Yitzchak, Ha Rabbi Akiva. There's two Tanoim here in the Mishnah, as reflected in the Seifa of the Mishnah. The Tanan, like the end of our Mishnah, says Rabbi Yitzchak Omer Lefi Roiva Kal He Mevarchen. Rabbi Yitzchak says, based on the number of people, even beyond 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, you would increase the lashon of the zimun. Shne'emar, the pasuk, it tells us as the pasuk tells us in Tehillim, right, in the congregations they bless Hashem, which we explain means different congregations would have different blessings based on the number of people that are actually there. So that's why Rabbi Yosef Glili would be the second opinion listed in the Mishnah, 100, 1,000, 10,000, versus the first opinion, 10 and 10,000, or 10 and 100,000 is the same. That's actually Rabbi Akiva. Now this is actually a continuum. Amar Rabbi Akiva, ma matzinu b'beis hakneses. Rabbi Akiva said in the Seifa of the Mishnah, just as in the Beis HaKnesses, you always just say Berachos Hashem and Berachos Hashem. Rabbi Akiva says you don't change if there's more people. So he says in zimun it's the same. 10 or 10,000 is the same. Rabbi Akiva, Hatorah, Rabbi Yosef Glili Mayavid. So the Gemara says, how does Rabbi Akiva resolve the pasuk of Mach RYhG? The answer is he uses it as the Bryce illustrates. Rabbi Meir used to say, Rabbi Meir used to say, how do we know that the babies inside of their mothers even said shira? They even sang songs to Hashem al hayam. They participated in that shira. Shene'emar, as the pasuk tells us in Tehillim, b'makelos baruchu Elokim Hashem. In your congregations they blessed Elokim Hashem. Mimekor Yisrael. Mekor could also mean the insides or the womb, the inside of a woman. So the insides of Israel also blessed Hashem, meaning alayam. Also the babies participated in shira. That's what Rabbi Akiva will use, like Rabbi Meir explains the pasuk in Tehillim. Ve'ilach, and Rabbi Yosef Glili says back, Mimekor nafka. No, he learns that drasha from the words mekor at the end of the pasuk. But the beginning of Mach RYhG teaches us you increase as the kehila increases in size. Different kehilas will have different languages. Amar Rava. Rava says, what's the psak? Halach Rabbi Akiva. So the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva. 10 or 100,000, it's the same. You always say, mevorach Elokeinu shachalnu mishaloi. You don't say anything beyond that. The Gemara tells us a couple of stories. Ravina v'Rav Bar Buzi iklu lebei Reish Galusa. So Ravina and Rav Bar Buzi went up to the house of the Reish Galusa. Kam Rav Chama v'kama Hatorah be'meya. Now Rav Chama got up and he was searching to find 100 people. He thought perhaps the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva, like Rabbi Yosef Glili, and he wanted to find 100 people so they could increase the lashon of the zimun. So Ravina said back to Rav Chama, there's no need to do that. Hachi Amar Rava halacha ka Rabbi Akiva, because Rava said the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva. So therefore 100 or 100,000 make a difference. It's always the same as 10 mevorach Elokeinu anyways. Omar Rava continues, and Rava said like this: Kiachlina rifta be'Reish Galusa. When we used to eat bread at the house of the Reish Galusa, so it would sound like, from Rashi, the way he explains it, is a lot of people were eating at the Reish Galusa. This is actually very nogea to weddings, more like a lot of people would eat at the house of the Reish Galusa. So mevarchina and gimel. What we used to do was we would make a zimun 3 and 3, means we would group together in our little corner, and we would say Rabbi Yisrael mevorach in our little corner of 3 people, even though there were clearly 10 people plus in those rooms. So the Gemara says, "V'livruchu yod yod." Why wouldn't they wait to make? Meaning, if you don't want to wait for the Reish Galusa, which we'll explain in a moment why. Perhaps because there were so many people, they couldn't hear. Fine, but at least get 10 people so you could be mevorach. You could do the zimun with Shem Hashem. Why would you only do with 3? So the Gemara says, Shama Reish Galusa ve'ikba. No, because the Reish Galusa would hear and he would get upset. Once you have 10 people, he's going to say it loudly. The Reish Galusa is going to hear that in public you're leaving his party, you're disregarding his feast, and it's going to make him upset, so they didn't want to do that. Fine. So they stuck to 3. So the Gemara says, V'nifku beberkas de Reish Galusa. Why didn't they fulfill themselves with the bracha of the Reish Galusa? To wait for the Reish Galusa to bench and be yotzei with his bracha. So the Gemara answers, they had an issue with that. Aidi de avashu kulei alma leishami. Since there was a lot of noise there from all the people, they wouldn't be able to hear him. It's very interesting. In order to be yotzei, as they used to do, someone would say Birkas Hamazon out loud. The problem is, if there's 1,000 people in the room, maybe all of the noise would make it that they couldn't hear the Reish Galusa. So they wouldn't be yotzei Birkas Hamazon. So they had to do a zimun on their own. So they did 3. They didn't do 10 because they didn't want to make so much of a scene, but they did 3. They didn't want to wait to be yotzei with the Reish Galusa because they couldn't hear him and couldn't be yotzei with him anyways. Amar Rabba Taisva, and Rashi actually learns this connects to the previous story, I'll say in a minute. Rabba Taisva says a psak, Hani Gimel, the Karchi Rifti Bahadi Adadi, if 3 people eat bread together, V'kadim Chaminayu Ubarach Ladaite, and one of the 3, he benches already. He decides, I'm leaving. He benches. Ino nafkin bezimun day. So they could be Yaitse with him as part of the zimun. Means even though he's benched already, he hasn't done the mitzvah of zimun. So they can chap him after he benched and say, join us for zimun. But iyu lo nafik bezimun ditu. He has not fulfilled his mitzvah of zimun. Once you did Birkas Hamazon already, you're not Yaitse the mitzvah of zimun, but they could have you join and they're Yaitse the mitzvah of zimun. Lefi she'ein zimun lemafreya, because there's no such thing as a zimun retroactive, meaning once they've already done zimun, so once this guy already benched, he can't be Yaitse zimun, but they can grab him and he'll join them for zimun. So Rashi just ties this in, meaning those three chevra who at the house of the Reish Galusa, they decided they're going to bench, they could perhaps join so the others could have 10 or 3, but they're not Yaitse zimun. Actually, they've lost the mitzvah of zimun, although others can use them to join the mitzvah of zimun if they need 4 or 3 people afterwards.
What do you mean they lost it? If they did 3 together?
Once they benched. Once you bench, you can't be Yaitse. What's that? You can do zimun. Oh, you're right. In that case, yeah.
They don't have the Elokeinu zimun.
I guess, right. You're right. Yeah, exactly. It means you can't do zimun after you've benched. So if one guy benched, he can't be, but the others can grab him so that they could be Yaitse zimun. Right. He's not Yaitse zimun. Exactly. Retroactively, he can't be Yaitse zimun. Exactly. All right, let's finish up to the Mishnah. Rabbi Yishmael Loimer continues the Gemara. Rabbi Yishmael, it said in the Mishnah, so Rabbi Yishmael added on to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said in Shul that we say Baruch Hu es Hashem. Like that's how we say. So just as over there, there's no distinction in language by number. Also by zimun, there's no distinction. So Rabbi Yishmael commented and said, no, it's not Baruch Hu es Hashem in krias Hatorah, but rather Baruch Hu es Hashem mevorach, which is what we say, right? Rafam bar Papa Ikla leberi. This is such a classic story. Rafam bar Papa Ikla lebei kinish to the Abi Gibar. So Rafam bar Papa went up to the base of Knesset of Abi Gibar. Come Kara b'Safra. So he got an aliyah. Va'amar, and he said, actually like Rabbi Akiva, he said Baruch Hu es Hashem. He didn't say mevorach. Krias Hatorah is like one time in Judaism where you find everybody gets so excited. Bal Kaira misses one inflection or one nekuda. The whole shul screams at him. Most of the time, actually, you're still Yaitse, it's okay. Everyone gets so excited, and then the rest of Krias Hatorah, everybody's paying attention. I mean, it's unbelievable. So, Rabbi Yishmael said, you say mevorach. But what happened? So this fellow, Rafam bar Papa, he got up to do his aliyah, and he didn't say mevorach. He said Baruch Hu es Hashem. V'ishtek, and he stopped there. V'lo amar mevorach. He didn't say mevorach. Av shekulei alma. So everybody screamed at him, Baruch Hu es Hashem mevorach. No, you missed mevorach. That's the psak. So Rava said to this Rafam bar Papa, Pasya uchma. Pasya uchma literally means black pot. The rabbis were called black pot. It was actually a lashon chashivos, because the rabbis were so engrossed in their learning, they wouldn't take care of their clothing necessarily, and it would become dingy. Today, I don't know. Today we also, I guess, refer to some people like this also, but it was a positive thing. He said to Rafam bar Papa, Talmid Chacham, why are you entering into a machlokes? It's true. Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah says you could say Baruch Hu es Hashem mevorach, but he's not excluding Rabbi Yishmael. He agrees to Rabbi Yishmael Yaitse if you say mevorach. And furthermore, Hano Galma Rabbi Yishmael. The minhag is like Rabbi Yishmael. So Mamela just say Baruch Hu es Hashem mevorach, and we know Lemaisa that's the halacha Lemaisa that we do today. Baruch Hu es Hashem mevorach. Why would you do otherwise? He will stop here at the Mishnah, towards the bottom of Nun Amud Aleph. As Hashem, we'll pick up tomorrow with Nun Amud Beis. Everyone have a wonderful day.